So do you support a Pacific travel bubble?
Yeah, good morning, Peter. We absolutely support the concept of a Pacific travel bubble and working out arrangements with various Pacific countries to enable the resumption of travel for tourism and other purposes, business purposes, in reasonable time. Of course, Prime Minister Morrison and Prime Minister Ardern have said in their statement that we have to get the trans-Tasman bubble up and running first, and then we are already doing the policy work to be ready to open up to Pacific countries after the success of the trans-Tasman bubble. And there's good reasons for that. I mean, it relies on both countries' jurisdictions. I mean, many places in the Pacific, you've got to remember right now, Peter, are still in lockdown. Even in Fiji, schools are closed. There are 28-day quarantine periods in many Pacific countries, 28-day quarantine periods. And those countries have done an absolutely fantastic job in limiting the spread of COVID in the Pacific. It's been a regional success story. Australia and New Zealand have played their part, and we're very concerned in the restart of any travel bubble to make sure the arrangements are properly thought out so we don't actually spread COVID into the Pacific.
Sure. There are 15 Pacific nations that are at the moment coronavirus-free, basically. Which ones have expressed interest to get a Pacific travel bubble going?
Yeah, well, notably Fiji at the moment. And look, there's about 350,000 Australians go to Fiji every year for tourism. I mean, it's a huge part of their economy. There are things we can do in between, mind you. We want to work very closely with the government of Fiji, and we will, to make sure that we can re-establish those relations. And it's something I think both of us look forward to. But in the meantime, we are also working on enabling more Pacific workers to be able to come here and do the seasonal work that they do. We've got about 10,000 here in Australia. We'll have some shortfalls now in the agricultural sectors out there doing seasonal work, and we think Pacific Islanders can come here and work and have the remittances go back to their countries in the middle of this pandemic. We know those revenue streams are really important for Pacific countries and the families and the people of the Pacific. So we'll be doing that as well. So we're working very closely with our counterparts, and Fiji is a good example.
Okay, so Fiji's interested, Tahiti, Solomon Islands are a couple that may have expressed interest as well. What are your concerns? If the travel bubble's opened up, what are your concerns, particularly in these, nations where conditions are a lot poorer, I suppose?
Well, our number one concern is both the health and economic impacts of this pandemic, and the health impacts primarily. I mean, we don't want to, and no Australian wants to be responsible for an outbreak in the Pacific. We've worked very closely with the governments there to build their health systems, to ensure that they're ready, and there's been great leaps and bounds in that space. But, you raised some good examples there, Peter, and Tahiti, for example, is a very different example to Solomons or Fiji, and direct flights from France has implications for a travel bubble with Australia and New Zealand. All of these sorts of issues have to be ironed out and well thought through. And one of the cases in Tahiti was a policeman from France coming to Tahiti. So all of these things have to be ironed out for the safety of everybody involved, and we will iron them out. We will get there, I think, Peter. But obviously, starting a trans-Tasman bubble makes sense first.
Sure. Last night, Minister, the OECD issued a report. It is said that if there is a second wave, it could affect our economy to the tune of $25 billion. It's a significant amount. How much does something like that affect your thinking at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to avoid second waves. We want to wait out for a vaccine, and Prime Minister Morrison's announced a lot of money investing in international vaccines. We've just done a $300 million commitment to the Govt Institute to make sure we can vaccinate children. We're working on the international health response so that we can be ready to take advantage of that like other countries. And so avoiding a second wave is very important. And for the Pacific, still we need to make sure those health systems are ready to go in case there is a second wave.
Okay, just a couple of quick ones, Minister, before you go. China has warned its students against coming to Australia because of the coronavirus and because of racism as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this flies in the face of everything we know about Australia's international student sector. And just this week, ironically, Australian universities came out as third overall in the world as best to study at. And you've had hundreds of thousands of Chinese students coming to Australia, studying in safety, in peace, in happiness, having a fantastic experience. And you've got hundreds of thousands over the last decade of people coming from other countries, India, Nepal, Philippines. Every one of these countries records a great experience in Australia. There are isolated incidents like there are in any country of bad behaviour. We reject those. But the reputation and the brand of Australia and the friendliness and the welcoming nature of our country is well known to all, and the sector has thrived. We've been booming with people wanting to come here and study. That flies in the face of this misinformation that suggests that there's something untoward going on here. Students want to come here. So we would say to the Chinese government, like we would to all of our partner countries, let your students come here. They have a great study experience, and it's a great connector between us as peoples.
Concetta Fierravanti-Wells crossed the floor last night when it came to, Australia's relationship with China. What did you think of that move?
Well, that's a matter for her. She can answer for herself. But the government is eyes wide open about the situation in the world today and the geostrategic competition between America and China. We understand the implications of it, and we've got to carefully negotiate the balance between that geostrategic competition and make sure Australia is as well placed as we can be.
Okay, Minister, there is another Black Lives Matter protest planned in Sydney tomorrow night. What's your thoughts on that? Should that go ahead?
Well, I'm disappointed to hear this, and I think I would say to those people that are trying to organise mass protests at the moment, think about the sacrifice that all Australians have made at this time. There's a reason to it. There is a serious pandemic. The pandemic threatens vulnerable populations like the Indigenous community. It threatens the Pacific community. It's okay to sacrifice your right to protest just at the moment to enable health security for all Australians. And that's what everyone else has done. People haven't gone to funerals, businesses are closed, unions haven't protested in support of their rights. There are lots of worthy causes. This is a worthy cause for them, and I understand that. But it's not the time. Respect the sacrifice of Australians, respect Indigenous and vulnerable populations and the health advice of officials.
But there is an interesting debate, and just finally here, Minister, an interesting debate that's taking place at the moment regarding statues of colonial figures. This follows what's happened in the UK, where some statues of some notables have been taken down. Now there's a push over here to take statues down. James Cook is amongst them. What's your position on that? And this also, follows the argument that, culturally sensitive movies and TV shows are being taken off streaming services at the moment.
Yeah, well, Peter, I think like a lot of people, this is a very uncomfortable issue for a number of reasons, and there's a couple of issues underneath what you ask. Firstly, to statues of slavers, I don't know why there is a statue of slavers. I mean, people reject slavery. Our cultures have said slavery is wrong. We've overturned it. We've made sure people can't do it. I mean, we passed a Modern Slavery Act in Australia just a year or two ago to work on supply chains, that there's no slavery within supply chains. So it's inconsistent with values that people hold. And I think there's a way that people can raise that with their local authorities to have those statues removed. When you're talking about art or literature or culture, censorship, as we know, and censorship is, you have to be very careful about what you censor and what you prevent in terms of thinking, because art relies on abstraction. Gone with the Wind is a fantastic movie. My dad, bringing us up, would make us watch all the old black and white movies, and it's a great era of cinematography. And Vivien Leigh happened to be my favourite actress when I was growing up. But I never took out of Gone with the Wind that the South was something great. It was just a great movie, and it's an abstract about a period in time. So we've got to be very careful about the thought police coming in and saying this is no good and that's no good. People are capable of thinking about an era, about the wrongs and the rights of it, and making their own independent judgments. And that's what art enables us to do in a way that is entertaining. Okay,
so just on those statues, do you think a James Cook statue should be placed in, say, a museum?
Well, no, I don't personally. I think the story of Australia is actually overwhelmingly a positive one. The explorers and the settlers that got sent by the British government here, including Arthur Phillip, were enlightened people for their time. Arthur Phillip was part of the anti-slavery movement, and these things are lost. Now, you can't say he's a perfect person, but none of us are perfect people, Peter. And there were standards at that time that he was involved in like anyone else, but he was, on balance, a decent guy. I'd encourage anyone to go up and look him up and learn a little bit about him. And if you see some of these things and you look into their what actually went on, there are reasons why we have statues of founders here, and I think there is some respect there. What happened is our history. It's our shared history between Indigenous Australia and non-Indigenous Australia. But we're all in this together now. It's all our history, and we should remember it, and we should own the good bits and remember the bad bits.